Ah, boy. You ever have that point where you realize my mic's been muted the whole time? Well, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to go on as long of a uh, rant as I was going on before. I don't feel I've got the energy for it, but I felt I had to, get something going. I've repeatedly talked lately, probably without any kind of real sound recording going on. Thanks. I mean, it's a small little uh, button on the side here, and when you push it, it mutes it. But I didn't notice that it had been muted. It's a thing that humans do. But it's like one of the things I keep referencing as I'm trying to make this video is a shot. It's a short film that I saw, sort of a what Obi-Wan should have told Luke Skywalker sort of thing. And in it you have Obi-Wan Kenobi, you have Luke Skywalker looking as they did back in the um back in the 1977. Marvelous. High definition 4K looking, you know, they look very much like they did, except they don't move. They don't seem to react to what they're telling each other. They don't seem to focus inwards like, you know, Mal Guinness did in that part of the scene, that famous scene where he gives Luke the lightsaber. That famous moment, replayed in trailers for um, episode 3, if I remember correctly. You know, before this is the weapon of a giant knight, keepers of justice and so on and so forth, for the dark times, for the empire. Of that speech, if you know it, you know it. Go look it up, watch it again. But this time, look at the way they perform the scene. Even the most sort of rote sort of performance, they're going to be doing something. They're going to be listening to each other. They're going to be reacting to each other. They're going to be, expressing themselves, expressing some inner sort of life. The best performances optimize this, but even the worst performances have some element of it, some heartbeat behind it. And that's the thing. That sense of life. It's not just simply a matter of, oh, people are better, practical effects are better. No, I'm not one of those people who believes that. CGI is fine in my book because I remember I am old enough, though I may not look it, I am old enough to remember back in the day when optical effects, optical print, you know, compositing was the state of the art, was the thing that most of your movies had. complete with the matte lines, complete with the generational loss, which is one of the, if you see some recent documentaries on, what they did with 2001: A Space Odyssey. Um, there's some marvelous, marvelous stuff about how they essentially did a one exposure sort of thing with that, so that you didn't have so much of a let's see, where they did a, like they did it so that, you had one exposure of, the spaceship and one exposure of the moon image, and it would look marvelous and crisp because they didn't, kind of do an optical printer thing with it. But, that was the way they put images together for the longest time. Just basically one strip of film here, one strip of film here, and expose a third strip of film through each one of them. And in the old days when they did blue screen or green screen or whatever, they separated. They were basically doing a photographic sort of thing, a photographic sort of masking, and they were developing a print of the film, a version of it that would serve as a sort of a mask, and that photographic mask was what they used to cut things out instead of a more video like chroma key, where the computer just chooses all the pixels that have this color value and uh, dials their transparency down to zero. That's how they used to do that. Um, I remember that sort of thing. I remember back when models were the only models you could get. But it's sort of strange. A lot of things we took for granted as being um, computer generated models in movies of the late 90s, early 2000s. A lot of those were actually practical models. You know, yeah, it's you get a lot of artificial sort of categories that people make up, and practical effects, I think, is one of them. Because what we're really talking about is several different disciplines. You got special floor effects like what you see in Raiders of the Lost Ark when Harrison Ford is running from that big boulder, and it comes running down behind him. The sort of things that happen on the set, sort of special effects. Um, there's special makeup effects. There's animatronics. We're really doing, with the label practical effects, we're really doing the variety of different effects work. We're really doing it some disservice, in my opinion. But we're also kind of forgetting that basically, for the most part, if you wanted a special effect done in between, say, if you wanted to do a model and motion control, something that wind goes on its own little path instead of just, sailing through camera or just statically, you know, being put up there. If you wanted to do a model, you had to do a real object and you had to get a camera very close to it, and you had to record it. Uh, you had to record it. You had to record it, and you had to film it. That was the important part. You had to film it. The film had to come out right. If it didn't come out right, you had to refilm it if you could. Um, you had to sandwich it together with film elements. You had to blue screen it out, mask it out using photographic elements, so on, so forth. I mean, it pays to go looking through documentation and articles on how they did these things, because then you get a sense of why they did it, went to digital, why they use digital tools. But at the same time, like at the same time, it's sort of like there was an artist. There is still an artistry to it. I know because I actually computer animated things myself. I'm not too many things, but one of my first videos on my channel is a computer animated grasshopper, ship, you know, and it's the first thing I ever animated. The first little thing I ever did. And, I basically brute force learned Lightwave in order to do that. And ever since then, I've, learned much more about how to do things right in, in that on that platform. Only problem is, how much yeah, we take it for granted getting very quickly rendered. We take it for granted that CGI is there. We think, oh, CGI is instant. CGI is easy. I dare any of you to try and render something photorealistic on a computer animation platform on your own personal computer. You're going to find, and keep in mind, you have to have 24 frames every second, 24 frames a second. And you, however long, however many seconds or minutes that sequence is you are rendering, you have to get that 24 frames a second every second for however long that is. So a minute easily becomes 6 times 240 frames. 6 times 240 frames. And 2 times, let's see, 3 times 240. I think that's 720. Yeah, 720 plus 720, about 40. Hey Google, what is uh 60 times 24? 60 times 24. Yeah, about what I thought. 1,440 frames per minute. Mm. And what happens if it takes an hour to render one of those frames? Or even just, let's be kind to ourselves, 10 minutes. 10 minutes times 1,440. 10 minutes times 1,100, 1,440. Uh, that's about 14,000 uh, minutes worth of 14,400 minutes worth of rendering. 14,400 minutes. Hey Google, how many days is 14,400 minutes? 14,400 minutes is equal to 10 days. 10 days. 10 days. If it takes 10 minutes to render your each frame, or wait a minute. Well, I think the point's made. Regardless of how, once you start getting into, if it's 10 minutes per frame at 14,000, you know, for, 1,440, that's about 10 days worth of rendering um, for 1 minute worth of screen time. And of course, is your average feature film um, runs about, let's see, 10, about 12, 7, 6, you know, it's like 2 months to render a short movie at 60 minutes. um, or on the other side of things, pardon me, as much as half a year to do all that rendering. So there you sort of, I'm sorry, pardon me, but you have that much time to have to render something, which is why they have big sort of render farms to do this, because nobody wants to take that long, especially if they're going to get feedback. They're going to get feedback. And they're going to need to reiterate the image, re-render it, and so on and so forth. So it's an art form. It's a rather expensive art form too. But I guess what I'm trying to get across here that I think people may not appreciate is just the extent to which everything is just, it takes time to do this. It I can get on a tangent on this, but it's not necessarily a work free sort of thing. You have to do the work. You have to put in, you have to be clever about it. You have to figure out ways to get it done quickly and well. So the title of this the title of this video Sorry. So I guess when I'm sort of a lot of people they look at that those sort of daunting sort of uh, things, and the objection seems to be that we're sort of the objection seems to be, oh, it's digital, it's lifeless. You know, people weep over the first few minutes of the Pixar movie Up. People weep, and that's completely computer animated. Why do they weep? Because there's artistry behind it. There are choices made behind it. They they can they have gotten caught up with the characters. They've gotten caught up with the characters, and now they are hit with a dramatic setback for those characters, a sad, you know, event in their lives, and they feel it. And it's a reference outside, the kids can understand it. Oh, the kids, or it might fly a little bit over their heads, but they might take other cues or a parent's explanation to understand that, well, that lady couldn't have children, and that's what sets up the rest of the movie. That's what gets people interested. Now, I've been going on again and again about this video I saw about this sort of presentation of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker talking to one another. And I'm sure I've been through the whole thing of, you know, their responses to one another within that conversation, as opposed to these AI recreations of them, which just are still and just they say their lines, but there's not much, you know, evidence of what's going on up here or here for the character. And I think I don't think AI is really going to improve on that anytime soon. I don't want to be too much of a Luddite, too much of a, oh, they'll never figure it out. You're going to have to feed back in some humanity if they want to make any progress. That's a thing I think people these days don't appreciate. They're so obsessed with literalism. They're so obsessed with just presenting A equals A, and just having this dead sort of blinders on sort of I have the sole true interpretation, da 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 da. And that's part of why I don't think they really look and see why AI is inadequate, because they're not thinking here, they're not feeling here as part of what they're doing. I mean, I know some people might say that's unnecessary, just do what the business is doing. Not everybody cares about emotions and things like that, except you look at the hit films, you look at the stuff that appeals to people, that makes people stand up and cheer. Yeah. That speech in Independence Day. We will not go quietly into the night. We will not, so on and so forth. Yeah. there is some humans. I mean, as much as the speech may not make sense, as much as it might be nonsense from a certain perspective, you know, there is heart to it. And Bill Pullman is acting his heart out in it. And, you know, David Arnold's score is pumping that moment up for all it's worth. Uh, and that's part of why people cheer that moment. But if all you're doing is just running through the motions, if all you're doing is just you know you know typing the speech, you can have a character just, and you might even one day be able to get a setting which has the character doing da, 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 da. But you know something, there's something about watching a human being run that software, that in that script. There's something about watching a human being run that software, of having two human beings run that software together, because those two human beings can see into the subtext of the script, can see into the thematic space of that. They can feel, they can they can have excitement and passion, reflectiveness and remembrance, like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker in that famous lightsaber scene, the one that they used the audio of to back one of the first episode 3 previews. Watch that episode 3 preview, you know and see how that contributes, and how you can kind of composite together a meaning that was rich in one context with another context, and that context, they work together to synergize to build up you know anticipation for a story, because when it comes down to it, storytelling isn't just about grabbing people's attention. It's about using that attention once you have it, and putting it through some things, drawing it through some events, and making that it worth it for that attention to have locked on to what you got there. I think that's part of what people don't quite grasp if they don't have some greater background. And I think that's the disservice that a lot of this AI video stuff does for people. You really need to learn if you want to be a true filmmaker. I'm not saying this in the way of being a gatekeeper or something like that. I'm saying this like somebody who is pointing at a mountain, you know? Look at that mountain over there. Look at that stone edifice. Now you can have a computer program Photoshop you into, with your fingers like this, smiling, Photoshop you into that picture, and you can say, "Oh, look here, I'm on top of this mountain." But that's not the same as taking a photo from that mountain. But what do I mean by all this twaddle, all this garbage? I'm talking about what you do in order to there is a value, there's a logical depth, there is an internal sort of reference, world of reference, and there's an external world of reference that you can use all these aesthetic skills, these aesthetic, points of knowledge that you can build up. You can use those to build images, to build meaning in those images, to 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 stack up, like visual elements, to you know block things before the camera, which is to say, stage people, objects, and other things along the z-axis, in the mise en scène, in order to give a sense of depth, in order to give a sense of life, of something extending beyond the borders of the screen and behind the images of the screen. What's in people's heads, what's in people's hearts. I don't think we need to grasp that that is what the point of a lot of this art is. We want to connect with other people, with their emotions and everything, to be just momentary sensory distraction. What will be the point of that? It's just going to be a snippet, 30 seconds, and bam. We used to dream. We used to pay attention for longer. And we can't get so much of the world. We can't soak so much in as we as we can if we pay attention for a bit longer. Let things run for a bit longer. Experience things. Experience more things instead of just going bit by bit. You know, attention grab it by attention grab by attention grab. It may make somebody more money to pull us through one distraction after another at a time, but it doesn't really do us any favors. And really, that's we should be paying attention to our self interests. I don't think I can say much that hasn't been already said elsewhere about jobs being stolen by AI. That's part of what makes me hesitant to use it because I would like to get the sense that people are being compensated for the derivation of work from their art, whether that's video, audio, or whatever, you know. And at the end of the day, if people are making these videos off these programs, uh, I don't think they're getting the full benefit learning really about what how, how I mean it's one of the things going into my years at Baylor University, for which I have a degree that's still up there as a point of pride on my wall. um, Going through my years at Baylor, before that I'd seen literally hundreds of films over a period of several years. um, I just stacked one on top of the other. And I would see quite a few films while I was up at Baylor. Um, in fact, that's where I would that's where I would get my taste for anime. Long before it was cool. And if you had told me that people would be able to imitate this at the click of a button, that would have seemed like science fiction to me. Back, in 1998. extraordinary. But if what you tell me is that, oh, but your whole profession could potentially become obsolete, and everybody who does things like you could be out of work. Oh, joy. But really, part of what learning that stuff, taking a class about that stuff, seeing examples, and knowing of examples, having gone through the story and everything, so many movies, having looked at the way, having learned about acting, about the, some of the basic techniques, the Stanislavski sort of uh, his innovations. I could see the I could see and understand more of the little things, the little nuances, the way a camera focuses, you know, depth of field, the way, the tone, the color timing, the sort of color temperature, the tone, the way the lighting is done. There is a kind of, this is a language as rich as any that you could find in a dictionary, with, and like language itself, it's just small little nuances can enrich a statement. And basically, when you get into this sort of the AI stuff, it's sort of like the audiovisual equivalent of that voice you get on a call tree. You know, it's the audio of visual. It's just yet another thing that corporate America is putting between you and any meaningful contact with another human being. The internet was never supposed to be a prison for our minds. It was never supposed to become the matrix. And the irony of people talking back and forth, the irony of people talking back and forth behind screen names, screaming at each other. Sometimes me doing that is myself, I'm not perfect. People being terrible to other people behind the protection of a screen. Fake people abounding. Bots everywhere. Bots talking to bots. Things pop up on your screen. AIs offering to, interpret everything for you. And folks selling the AIs as if they're, I mean, I go asking it for a simple math problem. Yeah, but that's sort of a glorified search engine. But really, when I look at it, when I the, the system seems to be becoming this thing that is meant to isolate, atomize, and control us. And it can't sell itself like that. It can't sell you. I mean, the Matrix doesn't sell people on the Matrix being unreal. The Matrix sells itself as, you know, reality. And it's got that grittiness. It's got that sort of realism that everybody wants. That look. And you can get a genuine looking Obi-Wan talking to a genuine looking Luke Skywalker. But you know what you can't get? What you can't get is the human beings running the software of that script through their brains, engaging the material. You know, Obi-Wan thinking of times past and that showing in his expression. And that's the thing, really. That's the thing. Even in days when they didn't have so much of that sort of method, sort of ability to kind of just inhabit the character as if they were living creatures. The the characters, you know, even then, there was some sense of the performance of emotion, some sense of the actors understanding the ideas behind what they were saying, a sense of reference beyond the frame, a sense of reference between people, connections upon connections, reaching out into greater meaning. That's what the internet is supposed to be. That's what this whole system is supposed to be. There is supposed to be a certain amount of mediation, but that mediation is supposed to work for us. And all I see in the offer to make Star Wars movies or make other sort of stuff from a prompt, all I see in that really is another interpretation. It can never get the it can never get the compensation that I'd like, that I'd prefer. It can never it doesn't seem to AI doesn't seem to understand why you make a choice, why you light things a certain way, why why the mood works the way it does. It doesn't understand how to properly piece together a spaceship so that the parts make sense. It just understands how to get the look of it, how to get the fossil of that appearance to it. There may come a point really where they figure out that if they really want to keep their AI trained, they're going to have to buckle down and pay people for their work, for their style. They're gonna figure out that maybe people won't get so bored with their toys so quickly, and tune out. if the tools begin to be more like, the supports for like doing something in Blender or doing something in Photoshop where you have control over the over underlying elements when you're not so much just copying somebody's style as you are creating your own, as you're making your own expression. When the mediation goes from being just the hallways of a prison, with people locked in their individual rooms, and becomes more of a intermediation between people who are communicating, who are learning, who are getting truthful information to themselves so that they can make decisions for themselves that work, so on and so forth. I don't use AI. I don't want to use AI in many instances because it seems like more of a barrier to me relating to people than it seems to be a conduit for that relation. And I think ultimately, unless you learn more advanced skills in terms of your writing, in terms of your pictures, there comes a point where you just don't feel the life in it anymore. So I guess that's it, basically. That's part of what I wanted to say, part of what I was trying to say in the title. That part of what discourages me from using AI for the most part is I feel like it's in the way of expression. It gets in the way of people learning valuable skills. It gets in the way of them being compensated for the efforts, for the cost it takes to learn those skills. There's a value to just learning how to do, how to do basic videography, to learning how to compose, to learning how to use light to your advantage, to learning how to stage things in depth, how to set up, you know, how to set up your actors, how to get good performances out of them, to bring life to the material. These are important things. These are good things. These are things that help people express things, get what's in here out. I think a system that just wants everybody containerized and isolated and controlled, sooner or later, that's just going to create the motivation to break out of that, perhaps violently. And you can't keep people in that kind of containment forever about pressures building up, about real human yearnings building up. So I guess when push comes to shove, if people want to do more, I mean, this is sort of one of my pet peeves. This is kind of what annoys me to no end when people start talking about lost skills and lost art forms and things like that. Well, it is true that A lot of skills, a lot of artistic um, disciplines have become, there are fewer and further between folks, and some knowledge has indeed been lost. We need to recognize something, and that something is that things are being lost by choice. People are making the decision, okay, now it's obsolete, so let's, do away with it. And what I think we need to do a number of things, and one of the things that we might really need to do is kind of try and learn and figure out how to do the things that we used to know how to do. And maybe we'll recover that knowledge. Maybe we'll learn how to do something else that's equivalent, that does the same thing, and perhaps does it better and uses today's technology in order to do it. You know, I mean, I think you can learn to do stop motion uh, animation. You can just use a you can do that on your cell phone camera. I think these days, just put it on a tripod and just dut, 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 and everything is going to be about problem solving in some way, figuring out how to portray a certain thing, how to portray a certain event. And there might be lost knowledge. Well, that happens. It's happened throughout history. And what happens is that sometimes people recover the knowledge. They do a little analysis of things and realize, okay, this is how they probably did it, and they recreate that. And on the other hand, maybe they figure out something new. I don't know. It's. I think there's something to be said for not giving up, for not getting pessimistic, for understanding that the people in the executive offices, the money people, they're always chasing. They always have been chasing the next big thing, and they always will be. In part because that's part of their job, but also in part because they're incentive seekers. They're they s- they are profit seekers. That's what gets them up in the morning. That's what feeds them through what they do every day. That's motivation. And I think part of it is just, we have to learn how to preserve knowledge and the value of preserving knowledge. We have to get out of this mindset that everything has to be, continually creatively destroyed, that everything has to be continually redone, that, there's so many different prisons for our minds that we need to break out of. But I guess the long story short on all of this is that you need to learn how to savor skillfulness. That you need to learn how to value the doing of a thing yourself. But there's another part of it, and I think I don't know whether I had a couple of episodes that I basically destroyed now because they just had no audio whatsoever. You know, I don't know I don't remember off the top of my head which ones they were. Um, but there there is a sort of I have this sort of sense that part part of what I've talked about recently is fan films and things like that. But I think a good, honest live action film made by somebody who's doing their best to kind of do a real movie, that to me just seems that seems okay. That's good. That's It's not as good as them learning how to make their own work, and also not. I think I made a point about copyright being sort of not in your favor when you do somebody else. When you play in somebody else's sandbox, they get to keep the toys. That's just the way it works. Yeah. Um. That we're already there. It's their toys. But if you are going to play with somebody else's toys, I think there's more to admire in those people who kind of build their own story, who understand how to put together the framework, what the value certain, you know, perspectives, certain framings and everything. Long story short, it needs to be more of an expression, less of a just an interaction, less of order to it. So I guess that's it for the time being. Y'all have a good night.